Growing a forest in the middle of the desert has become reality, with Egypt eyeing more of these projects to support its economy and fight environmental and climate changes. If you think Egypt is still a land with deserts and pyramids, then welcome to a new Egypt, which is going to be blue and green. Egypt has already managed to plant trees in the desert using wastewater as part of plans to preserve the environment, reduce pollution, and optimize the use of natural water resources, and the Serapium Forest is a living example of this, which has boomed despite the drought and rainfall deficit. Consisting of 200 hectares of trees planted in Ismailia city in northeast Egypt, the forest has been a vital project that set a precedent for other projects to reduce water pollution and unemployment. So how is Egypt planning to further turn its desert green? And are there any hurdles in the way? Let's find out in today's video. Hello, and welcome to our channel Building the Future. In today's video, we are going to give you exclusive details about Egypt turning green. So make sure to watch the video till the end to find out more, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing videos. It looks like a mirage, but the lush fields of cauliflower, apricot trees, and melon growing among a vast stretch of sand north of Cairo's pyramids is all too real, which is definitely a proof of Egypt's determination to turn its deserts green. While climate change and land overuse help many deserts across the world advance, Egypt is slowly greening the sand that covers almost all of its territory as it seeks to create more space for its growing population. Tarek El-Kaoumi points proudly to the banana trees he grows on what was once Sahara sands near the Desert Development Center, north of Cairo, where scientists experiment with high-tech techniques to make Egypt's desert bloom. All of this used to be just sand, he said. Now we can grow anything. With only 5% of the country habitable, almost all of Egypt's 74 million people live along the Nile River and the Mediterranean Sea. With already crowded living conditions, Cairo is one of the most densely populated cities on Earth, and it will likely get worse as Egypt's population is expected to double by 2050. So, the government is keen to encourage people to move to the desert by pressing ahead with an estimated $70 billion plan to reclaim 3.4 million acres of desert over the next 10 years. But to make these areas habitable and capable of cultivation, the government will need to tap into scarce water resources of the Nile River, as rainfall is almost non-existent in Egypt. However, the plan has raised controversy among some conservationists who say turning the desert green is neither practical nor sustainable and might ultimately backfire. Anders Jägerskog, director of the Stockholm International Water Institute in Sweden, questions the wisdom of using precious water resources to grow in desert areas unsuited to cultivation and where water will evaporate quickly under the scorching sun. A desert is not the best place to grow food, he said. From a political perspective, it makes sense in terms of giving more people jobs, even though it is not very rational from a water perspective, he added. The scope of the reclamations could also add to regional tension over Nile water sharing arrangements, as in order to green its desert, Egypt might need to take more than its share of Nile water determined by international treaties. Egypt's project to reclaim deserts in the south, called Tashka, has expanded Egypt's farmland by about 40 to 60%, using about 5 billion cubic meters of water a year. That worries neighbors to the south who are already unhappy about Nile water sharing arrangements. Under a 1959 treaty between Egypt and Sudan, Egypt won rights to 55.5 billion cubic meters per year, more than half of the Nile's total flow. Ethiopia, where the Blue Nile begins, receives no formal allocation of Nile water, but it is heavily dependent on the water for its own agricultural development in this often famine-ravaged country. The Tashka project will complicate the challenge of achieving a more equitable allocation of the Nile River with Ethiopia and the other Nile Basin countries, said Sandra Postel, director of the US-based Global Water Policy Project. Egypt may be setting the stage for a scenario that's ultimately detrimental to itself. But other experts suggest that in the delicate arena of water politics, it may be more of an imperative for Egypt's government to mollify its own population rather than heed its neighbors' concerns. Overcrowding is straining infrastructure in the cities, and the government is worried that opposition groups such as the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood, which has a fifth of the seats in parliament, might capitalize on discontent. The government feels it needs to reduce the number of people in high-density areas, which puts a lot of pressure on resources like fertile land, said Mostafa Saleh, professor of ecology at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. They are trying to spread the population to other parts of the country. Adding to the water controversy, some critics say that Egypt should look at desert tourism rather than agriculture, which might not be sustainable or particularly profitable and could destroy fragile wildlife habitats that might otherwise be a drawcard for tourists. A desert reclamation project last decade, south of Cairo, destroyed much of the Wadi Rayyan oasis and its population of slender horned gazelles. The price tag on these assets is huge, both as natural heritage and as a resource for tourism. Saleh is vice president of an Egyptian firm that built an electricity-free ecolodge consisting of rock salt and mud houses amid olive and palm groves in the desert oasis of Siwa. According to her, the lodge, which cost $400 per night and has attracted guests such as Britain's Prince Charles and Belgium's Queen Paola, shows that the desert would be better used for ecotourism than farming. In Egypt, water is the most critical resource, and we should be careful to use it to maximize revenue, Saleh explained. Agriculture is not the best option for Egypt. Nature-based tourism could bring in much more money. However, there are some experts who believe greening the Sahara might be Egypt's best hope of bringing prosperity to its people. In addition, workers graft fruit-bearing plants onto the stems of plants that survive well in the desert. Favorite fruits are citrus as they flourish in hot climates and can land on supermarket shelves in Europe hours after harvesting. Moreover, proximity to markets in Europe and a lack of pests, which usually thrive in humid environments, make desert farming economically viable. Water supply, Tutwiler said, shouldn't be an issue at least for the next 10 years. It makes sense, he says, to expand agriculture onto land that was once useless. There is no frost and there is sun all the time here, he said. Plants just go nuts. Currently, the government is importing cereals from global markets, leaving the country's poor heavily exposed to fluctuations in world food prices, effectively importing water in food form. The lack of security on the open market, as shown when Russia banned wheat exports in 2010, has even prompted the government to consider growing cereals in other countries, including Sudan. While better use of current water supplies seems to be the most practicable idea for improving national food security, others see a broader solution just around the corner. We hope you enjoyed this video. We will be back soon with more amazing content, so stay tuned. And don't forget to like our video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our latest updates. You can always change your mind later. Thanks for watching.